Welcome back to another episode of the Bearcat Basketball Podcast. This is Season 2. I'm your host, Alex Meacham, former UC basketball player from 1997 to 1999 under the legendary coach Bob Huggins. I was fortunate enough to wear the iconic Jordan brand unis during my time. Now, you can follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Alex_Meacham. Meacham is spelled Meacham. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn, Alex Meacham. I'm on Snapchat, Big Meach 41. And now, I can officially say this. On Season 2, I am now on TikTok, at Alex Meacham 41. This is a special edition of the podcast, my interview series with a very special guest. Bearcat fans, I would like to welcome in my next guest. He is currently the Senior News Director for Content at the Enquirer. Now, he has deep roots at UC, studied journalism at the University of Cincinnati, worked for the News Record. Man, we're going to talk about that because that takes me back. Was the sports editor at the Enquirer and was the beat reporter for UC basketball. In 2014, he released his book, Tales from the Cincinnati Bearcats Locker Room. Like to welcome in my guy, Michael Perry. Michael, how you doing?
Alex, good to hear you. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing very well. Hey, tell everybody real quick, you're originally from Cleveland, correct?
Correct.
Browns, Cavs, and Indians? Die hard?
Absolutely. In the blood.
So does that mean that you've been here long enough. Any love for Bengals, Reds? I know you love Bearcats and Muskies, but Bengals and Reds?
Yeah, I mean, you always want the local teams to do well. It's good for the community. But if you're it's not like this with my kids. Like, they all like different teams, but I grew up with Cleveland Browns in my blood. So you can ask your guys, Ruben and Steve Sanders and Mel Levitt. Once that's in your blood, that's it.
Yeah.
It doesn't go away.
Now, the Browns might need you. Well, they're playing right now. They might need you today at wide receiver. You ready? I don't think they have any.
I saw that last night that they basically had no wide receivers, but they do have two of the best running backs in the league. So
yeah,
we'll
and
see.
they're playing the Jets.
And they're playing the Jets. So could get a lot. If this were the Pittsburgh game, I'd be way more nervous.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, you just mentioned something, and really, if you look at it, you being from Cleveland, you covering the Bearcats. I mean, if you look at the long line of not only great players but characters in UC basketball history that are from Cleveland: Steve Logan, Melvin Levitt, Steve Sanders, Ruben Patterson. I mean, that's the talent that has come out of that area and played for the Bearcats is amazing.
Yeah, those are some of the better players to come out of Cleveland in the last, 20 years or so. And it's funny because I took over the UC beat when Logan was a junior, and that's kind of how I first got to start conversations with him, was just talking about, no notepad, no pen, just talking about Cleveland and the Browns and all that, just trying to, make a connection with him. And, again, I follow all those guys on social, and I know they're all still big Cleveland fans. So It's kind of funny commenting on each other's pages.
I know Ruben is. I know on Instagram, Ruben really, man, he goes in for his Browns, man.
All of them do. Melvin and Sanders, they're always talking about it.
Man, that's good stuff. Hey, I will never forget this, and I appreciate this. You called me. You left me a voicemail after you listened to this podcast, but specifically my interview with Tony Bobbitt. And I want to tell you this, Michael. I haven't had a chance to tell you this because I've been saving this for the interview. But when I started the podcast, I got it going. I just wasn't sure, how it was going. Because, I get response from Twitter, blah, blah, blah. But just you're never sure when you do something, how people really react to it. But I knew after you left me that voicemail that I had something really good. Like, this was gold. So I really do appreciate that voicemail, very much so, of that Bobbitt interview. So thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you for doing these. I mean, the conversations you're having with the guys are great. And, it's similar to the concept of what I tried to do, but you're a peer, so they're very talkative with you and very candid. And I also find that the longer that guys are away, they're less cautious of what they say.
For sure.
So they seem to really enjoy the conversations with you, and it comes across in the interviews and the information. So, no, I have a great time when I'm listening to them. They're really good.
And what's amazing to me is that, a lot of these guys have never really told their full story in a long-form version, like Steve Sanders. When I interviewed Steve, he told me this was the first interview he's ever done where people ask him, or someone asked him about his football career. He goes, I always get asked about the shot, but no one asked me about my football career. So we dove into that and how it intertwined with basketball, and just kind of came to a conclusion that if you really look at it, Steve Sanders is one of the best athletes to come to the University of Cincinnati, to be able to play football at the level he did and then just transition into playing basketball the way he did and have success. I mean, it was truly amazing. So it's been fun for me to be able to get the guys in and talk about their whole story in a long form. You connected me up with, and I want to thank you for this, with Keith Jenkins, who works for you guys, the Inquirer, and he was fantastic. He really was. I got a lot of great response from that.
That was a great interview. I listened to that a week or two ago, and you guys had really good chemistry. It was a great conversation. Keith is very knowledgeable, so yeah,
yes, he is.
That was great to hear. I do have a bone to pick. I'm a little hurt that somehow I came weeks after Byron Larkin. I mean, come on. I texted him. He's a good friend. I texted him. I said, now, how did this happen? How do you get on the Bearcat podcast? I mean, come on.
Well, and we didn't actually talk about this on the podcast, but Byron and I go way back to when I was starting my freshman year of high school, and he was responsible for me breaking my leg. So I'd
like to hear that.
So I'll give you the Cliff Note version. I was a freshman going into my freshman year. I'd made varsity, believe it or not, leading into the season. I hadn't even been to tryouts yet, but the varsity high school coach, Duke Schneider at Seven Hills, told me I was going to be on the varsity team, but I had to earn all my minutes. So I'm super excited. I'm going to a preseason open gym, and in walks Byron Larkin. And me being a big Bearcat fan, I see them. He's kind of like, quote unquote, the enemy because he's a Xavier guy, but all-time leading scorer. I think he had a workout with some NBA teams at the time, and I'm like, man. And guess who has to guard him? This skinny 145-pound freshman. And he makes this move and accidentally kicks me in my knee. I go down, break my leg, and I tell you what, I was so angry with him for years. And what's crazy about it is that really led me to, transforming my game and my body, and it actually helped me out. So in an odd way, we have become very, very good friends, and he really helped me out. I saw him at a gas station on Reading Road years later, and I was now at this point 192 pounds, was in the Bearcat weight room with Mickey Marotti, who you remember.
Yep.
And it was the summertime, and Byron's pumping gas. I'm getting ready. I pull up. I see him. I get out of my car, and I'm like, hey, do you remember me? And he goes, oh, Lord. He was like, I'm so sorry. That's the first thing he said. So we go back. I mean, what a great guy, though. Like,
just don't give him credit for your success, Alex. Come on, man.
I'm not. But he had something to do with my journey that ended up pretty good.
Byron is a great guy. He's a great ambassador for the sport and for Xavier, and a good friend.
Yeah, no question. Tell everyone, what you're doing at the Inquirer and what the senior news director for content means.
God, I wish I could answer that question. Honestly, we're a much smaller newsroom than we used to be, so everybody kind of works together. I work with the sports editor and the investigative enterprise editor and the politics editor, but we're just a big team. The senior news director for digital was sitting by me when we were at the office, but we just all work together on the news coverage and planning and all that. And, it's 24/7 now. It's not like planning for Sunday. It's planning for the next hour.
Yep.
And most of our meetings involve talking about what's going online when. And so it's a much different industry than it was when I first joined it, but it's really exciting, and it's even faster paced than it used to be. So it's something I've always enjoyed from the beginning.
So was your start at the News Record?
It was. When I went to the University of Cincinnati, I was going to be undecided, and I had a high school counselor who said, don't do that. Just, what do you like to do? I said, I like writing. I think I had written a story in junior high where I put myself in it. It was about the track team. I think I'm in the third paragraph of my own story. It's the only way I could get in it. But anyway, I signed up for what UC called at the time pre-journalism. I didn't know they didn't have journalism at that time. And I walked into the News Record office the first week of my freshman year, and the sports editor said, you know anything about soccer? And I said, yeah, I played in high school. And he said, well, go cover the game tomorrow. And literally that was it. I got to go to the game. I got in for free. I got to talk to the coach afterward, and I got paid for it. And I thought, well, this is all right. And that was it. For 4 years, I wrote hundreds of stories for the News Record and became the editor. And I was off and running from week one.
Now, did you get to know my father at that point, or was it later on?
No,
okay.
Absolutely. I knew your dad then. He may not have remembered me as a student, but I knew a lot of the athletic officials at that time. And the funny thing was, when I came back to Cincinnati in the early 90s and then became the UC beat writer again in 2000, a lot of people were still there. Tom Hathaway was the sports information director when I was a student. I think he had just started. And then your dad was there. But, and that's why I remembered your dad, because when I was a student, he always treated me very well. And when you're a student, it's hard to get that. But there were certain people in that department who always treated me well and were respectful and professional. And, I always appreciated that.
And you mentioned, covering the Bearcats, and you covered them when you were with the Enquirer. Now, what years did you cover UC basketball?
Yeah, that was it was right after Kenyon left, and you.
Yeah.
I'll call it the Meeker era. No.
Okay. Of all players.
I came in after Kenyon left and Steve Logan was a junior, and I think I had Lowe's last 2 years, and then I think another one after that before I moved into the management side. Because I gave up the beat right when Huggs had his heart attack. So that was 2002 or 3.
Okay.
But I was around the program. In fact, I covered the Final Four team for the Alumni magazine. I just moved back to Cincinnati to work for the Alumni magazine, and they started, making a run the NCAA tournament. And I was telling the people in the office, like, this is a big deal. And they sent me on the road. So I was in Kansas City when they beat Memphis and to go to the Final Four, and I was in Minneapolis for the Final Four, and that's how I got to know some of these guys a little bit, but I've gotten to know them even more over the years.
It seems like you covered, the Bearcats for much longer than that. It seemed like you were there for a long time, right?
It does seem like it. And, and I covered Xavier for several years, but for some reason I covered the Crosstown Shootout for I want to say 15 years. Even when I wasn't covering either team, they would have me go do the main story on the Crosstown Shootout. And then I got to know Coach Huggins during that Final Four year because I was covering it for the Alumni magazine. But yeah, I know it does seem like I've covered probably more than I have.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Now we're going to jump into your book, Tales from the Cincinnati Bearcats Locker Room. But I do want to ask you this question. You left journalism from 2010 to 2018, correct?
2009. Yeah, I left.
Okay. And during that time is when you wrote the book.
No. What happened? The book actually, I wrote the book in 2004. The first edition of that book has Kenyon Martin on the cover, and I was the deputy sports editor when I wrote it in 2004. And then in 2014, I was contacted by a New York publisher that had bought the rights to it, whatever that meant, and they asked if I wanted to update it, and that was Sean Kilpatrick's senior year. And I said I would do it, so I worked on it for, I don't know, maybe 6 months. And so they came out with a second edition in 2014, but
Gotcha.
most of the interviews were 16 years ago, which is why I had to study up this morning to make
Gotcha.
sure I would remember something about it. But yeah, so I just happened to get that call, and I didn't want anyone else updating my book, so I decided to do it myself. Yeah.
And you mentioned you put Sean Kilpatrick on the cover.
Yeah.
Why Sean?
Well, I mean, if you remember his senior year, he was on fire, and he was the hottest thing. And I do remember the publisher wanted, I think, Oscar on the cover, but at that point in time, Sean Kilpatrick was having, one of the all-time great seasons. Mm-hmm. And, if I would have redone it in 2002, it probably would have been Logan. But it's just timing. Kenyon was hot, right, a few years before the first edition came out. And then I think Sean was a no-brainer. He was not only great as a player, but he was so popular with fans.
Oh, no question.
Yeah. In fact, when the book came out, I tweeted the cover at him. And long story short, he came over to my house and signed 100 books. I gave him a case. He signed 100 books, and I posted on social media that I had 100 books signed by Sean, and I think they were gone in like 24, 48 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, he was. Wow. He was at his height of popularity.
No question.
Yeah.
And so the reason I asked you that, and I knew your answer, but one of the reasons I asked you that was because I got to tell you an interesting story. And it ties into, you put someone like Sean Kilpatrick on your cover. But the funniest story, so when I was in the process of writing my book, Walk of a Lifetime, and you remember Simon Anderson.
Yeah.
Dr. Anderson was my publisher and editor at the time for the book, and Sam Dunn and Mark Brown were, helping writing it. And we had a meeting, and we were talking about the artwork for the cover. And I am not kidding you. This was actually the meeting. We were trying to decide what the cover was going to look like. And Dr. Anderson has, he's passed away. One just truly, truly a great human being, great man. He looked at us in the meeting and said, I have an idea for the cover. Have I ever told you the story?
It's sounding familiar. There's a chance it's in the book, but keep going.
He said to me, he goes, let's put Kenyon Martin on the cover.
Oh.
We all looked at each other, and we were like, okay, wait, you read the book, right? You like you read through the whole thing, right? And he goes, no offense to you, Alex, but if they see Kenyon on the cover, it's gonna sell. I was like,
and as I've said to you many times, it's not about writing the book; it's about selling the book.
It is.
And if Kenyon would have signed 5,000 of those, they would have been gone. But that book sold pretty darn well anyway.
It did. Thank you.
And it still is, I think.
It is. Thank you very much. And a lot of that has to do with Dr. Anderson and his ability to go to, Joseph Beth, and he would drive over to these places, and he would not leave until they bought books.
Yeah.
You remember him. He was a strong-willed guy from Wisconsin, great guy. But we had a little battle on that cover.
That would have been hilarious.
I know. I was like, I don't know about this one. But let's jump into the book. So what made you write the book?
Yeah, so the company called me. I knew a guy at that company. He had been a sports information director at Illinois when I covered Purdue. And he called me when I was at the Inquirer, and he said, hey, we do these books all over the place with all different programs. It's kind of tales from the locker room, and everybody does them differently. And do you know anybody in the market who could do the University of Cincinnati? Our publisher's interested. And I called him back the next day, and I said, what about me? And yeah, I basically nominated myself, and
for sure.
And then
as you should have.
I'm not sure how everybody did theirs. A lot of people just wrote them from memory. Like, you know, a guy like Dan Horde could probably just sit down and write his own without having to talk to people. But I thought it would be really cool to try to track down former players, coaches, administrators, and if I remember correctly, I think I ended up talking to like 75 or 85 different people, and some really remote people that took me weeks and months to track down. And I just would call them up, introduce myself, and ask them to tell me their favorite memories or their behind-the-scenes stories, something from the locker room, something from the huddles, something from recruiting. And, you know, it's like all interviews, you know, some were fascinating, some were more interesting than others. But, boy, just to be able to record that kind of history, I mean, it's kind of what you're doing. And when I think back to some of the people I interviewed, Alex, who are no longer with us, Tony Yates, Chuck Maychak, Jack Twyman, Ron Bonham, Pat Cummings, Dan Peters, there's probably more. I mean, it's sad, but I did feel at some point like I'm recording the anecdotal history with their stories, and you know, to have Tony Yates talk about, you know, himself, his thinking behind the slow down game against Kentucky, you know. Mm-hmm. And I remember saying to someone at UC, you ought to get all these people to talk on video, because somehow you got to preserve this history. You know, Oscar talking about all the things he endured in the arenas and the hotels and the restaurants. I mean, that is a really important part of UC history. And so it's one thing I love about your podcast is, you know, you're doing a lot of the, you know, the younger generation, but you're recording the history of some of these players, and it's really valuable because, you know, a lot of the people I talk to aren't around anymore, and I feel very fortunate that I recorded their stories.
And one thing I loved about it is how, you know, you intertwine the stories through, you know, it's almost in that order of every coach.
Yeah, and I don't know why I did it that way. It just seemed like a logical organization. So it is basically an anecdotal chronological history that started in the 1940s and, you know, went all the way through Sean's senior year in the new edition. And, no, I mean, I think it's nice to go back and read those. And if you've seen the book, they're all very short anecdotes, a page or two. Mm-hmm. And when I would do book signings with Terry Nelson, he would yell out, I remember this in a mall, he was yelling, "This is the perfect bathroom book. You can take it into the bathroom and finish a chapter." And I'm like, Terry, that is not my marketing strategy.
Oh, you gotta love Terry.
But boy, he would bring people in though.
Oh yeah.
He wasn't shy.
No question.
I saw you saw him yesterday. You dropped some stuff off.
Yeah, so, you know, and I think I talked about this on the last podcast with Kevin Johnson. You know, Terry's family's house was burned down, and they lost everything, and they've raised, I think he told me, over $56,000 on GoFundMe, which is absolutely incredible, and that's going to go towards, a lot of it's going to go towards the housing, but then, you know, they needed clothes and different stuff. So what I did was I got together, because they needed like XL and double XL stuff. Yeah, so I had a ton of Jordan and some of the Shining Star from my basketball program gear. So I got together,
that's awesome,
probably, you know, $1,000 worth of stuff that I just felt like it would go to better use with him. So then when I get there, you know, there were people bringing couches and all kind of stuff, really. And that's just, I think, the strength of, you know, the Bearcat community. You know, once a player, you know, like a Terry or Sean or Kilpatrick or whoever, if they're in need and put it out there, Bearcat Nation they do really step up to help former players.
Well,
that's one thing I do love.
Terry has really. So we must have just missed you. We were there like maybe an hour or two before you were there, dropping off some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Terry embedded himself in this community like many of those guys, and he's been around for 25 years. And
yep.
he is consciously become part of the community, and in many different ways, professionally and personally. So. I'm not surprised people are answering the call, and his attitude about it all is amazing. His kids were telling us some of the details of the story, and it's incredible. But yeah, no, I mean, I know that coaches in the past who have recruited players to Cincinnati, this both at UC and Xavier, they would talk about when you graduate, if you live in this community, you will forever be adored in this community and really treated well, and
yep.
whether that means job opportunities or personal opportunities, and a lot of that Final Four team, those guys are around, and
yep,
it's really amazing since none of them were from here.
And I think you're exactly right. And I've talked to, just doing the podcast, I'd finished up interviewing certain guys. I'll give you an example. Kenny Satterfield. When I interviewed him for the podcast, he's in the Bronx. And, he and we didn't really talk a lot prior to the podcast. We know each other, but we never really, reached out to each other. After that podcast, we started talking once a week. And long story short, Kenny has now moved to Cincinnati. His son plays at Oak Hills High School. And now Kenny's embedded in this community.
And his daughter's at Xavier, right?
Yep, and his daughter, and that's really what the driving force for him to come back here was his daughter, but also other opportunities he could have in this community. Then I got guys like Art Long. Art Long has now moved here. He's moved back to Cincinnati from New York.
This is why when guys are playing, when they're here and they have that platform, they can really capitalize by being accessible and, good people and saying and doing the right things, because you've got staying power in this market. And
yep.
If you do all those right things and then you want to stay in this market, you will get opportunities. But it's really funny to see a guy like Kenny, who I covered. I wouldn't say he was media friendly when he played, but watching guys grow up, and I did a book signing with Lowe, who I had a great relationship with Steve Logan when he played. I really liked Steve, and I think we really got along well. But I did a book signing with him in Cleveland in 2014, and just sitting there talking to the man versus the kid.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a really fun part about having covered college players, watching them develop over the years, and often by the time they're seniors, they're completely different people.
Oh yeah,
as it should be. Lenny Brown at Xavier, who would barely look you in the eye as a freshman, was just delightful by the time he was a senior, at least with me. And so you just never know.
Yeah, no, that maturation process is fun to watch, but I also think that the universities, not just UC, but I think a lot of colleges need to do more where they have people actually come in and talk about that to their players. I know UC's doing a good job of bringing in, speakers. They have me come in twice a year, and I actually speak to the football team, about different things, kind of like what you're talking about. And I think more players need to hear that, not only from someone like you that can deliver that, and then, someone like, myself or Steve Logan, or somebody who's been in their shoes, been in their seat, and has benefited from, being embedded in the community. So I think the more and more the current athletes hear that, see that, I think the better off. So it seems you agree with that.
I agree with that. And I've seen both programs try to do that. Xavier had a very detailed one with a different theme every month or two or every quarter, finance, behavior, whatever. And I did some of that at Xavier, and I did some of that at UC also, kind of media training type things. But guys got to want to they got to want to learn it, and they got to want to listen. I don't know.
It's true.
I don't know how receptive, but look, if you reach 2 or 3 of them, it's valuable. But there's lots of former UC players in this market who are not from here, who have made their lives and their homes here, and they're still royalty. They walk in that arena, they are still royalty.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was talking to Andre Tate, and Andre Tate says that he's Chicago through and through. Yeah. However, he has spent more of his life in Cincinnati than he did in Chicago. I mean, think about that. Like, he is the most Chicago dude you will ever meet, but yet he spent way more, so, and he loves his community, coaches high school basketball here. So I think it's
impressive. It's cool.
So tell people, and I try to tell them, some of the Bearcat fans, Bearcat fans have been great with me as far as the interviews. They really like them, and people send me messages that they appreciate, and say, hey, get this guy on, get that guy on. And I try my best to get as many guys on that people ask for. But what people don't understand, and would you talk about this, how difficult it is to get a hold of some of these guys just to get them to talk. Michael, can you talk about that?
Alex, think about 2004. This is pre-social media, pre-Facebook and Twitter, pre-Google, people barely had cell phones. So it's easier now to at least take a run. But look, there's some people I've been chasing for 15 years and I still can't get them. And you let me know when you haven't had Nick on, have you?
Not yet.
Yeah, you let me know when that happens. I mean, literally. I mean, there are some people that you chase and chase and chase, and there's some of the interviews I got. I got Kenyon. I think it was for 5 minutes. I think I had Lance Stevenson for like 5 minutes. But then, sometimes you make a plan and you got a time. And this is when people are different. Now, I have weird memories, but I remember Corey Blunt calling me one day, like we had an appointment scheduled, and he called to tell me that he wasn't going to be able to make it. He was really apologetic, and then we rescheduled. But nobody called to tell you they weren't going to make it.
Right.
It just spoke volumes about the kind of person he was, that he understood it was my time as well. But yeah, Alex, that's why I say when you get some of these people, it's amazing to me that you have landed some of these interviews, because I know it's really, even in this era with social media and connectivity, it's really hard. And there's guys that I just I never could have gotten D'Antonio or Art Long. Mm-hmm. But those interviews you did with those guys were fantastic, because
thank you.
They don't talk very much, and you never do hear from them. But look, I got probably the marquee get for me was Sandy Koufax, who's kind of was a known recluse who didn't talk, didn't do interviews. And I can't even remember how it happened. I think I found somebody who knew him, who explained to him. I think I wrote a letter explaining what I was doing. And, I don't think it was a long interview, but even to get 4 questions with Sandy Koufax is like a piece of gold. So
absolutely.
Anyway, it was a great. I mean, that was probably the great challenge of the book and why it took 6-8 months to do. But that's why I enjoy the podcast, because a lot of these guys you don't ever hear from.
No.
Some of them you hear from a lot, but that's why I really enjoy listening.
And I think some of it is I think I'm fortunate in a couple ways with the podcast. One is, like you said, the ability to get a hold of people, I think now is a lot easier. Now, they can easily ignore your message, but to get them a message is a lot easier. But I think timing is so very important. And I think I've hit a lot of guys where when the pandemic happened, the timing was just right. Like people were just chilling out, Michael, and had time to talk. Whereas like you've got a deadline with a book, and and sometimes people's timing doesn't line up with your timeline of when you want this. Whereas I could interview Nick Van Exel December of 2021, and it would still be perfectly fine. You don't have that.
If he doesn't get back to you for 4 months, it's okay. But when you're working on a project with a deadline, you don't have that luxury.
Right.
But you're still finding guys. And again, a phone call from you is going to be different from a phone call from me or even Keith Jenkins, because you're part of the family, you're part of the program.
Right.
But it all pays off. I mean, the winners are the people who listen to it because they get those great interviews.
No question. Real quick, too, you mentioned Corey Blunt a second ago. I remember you telling me a story about one of the book signings with Corey Blunt. Yeah. Do you remember that story? Can you tell that?
For sure I do. Yeah, it was at a bookstore in northern Kentucky.
Okay.
And
wasn't Logan there? Was Logan there or not?
It was Logan. Yeah, I think it was Logan and Corey. There may have been somebody else, and there was toward the end of it, the bookstore manager and this mom walked up to us, and there was this cute little kid there, and he had gotten a book, and Corey signed it to him, and he had a really unique name. It wasn't like John or anything. Mm-hmm. And the kid didn't understand that the books were for sale. He thought they were free. And the mom was like horrified, and she felt really bad, and the book manager was a little mad. And Corey Blunt stood up, pulled a billfold out of his pocket, and asked how much it was, and then he peeled off the cash and gave it to the bookstore manager and said he was going to buy the book for the kid. And again, it's just, that was 16 years ago, but it's one of those moments that you just think he is a different guy. What a great example. I mean, even when Corey was a player for the university, he was very professional, and even when he went through his eligibility issues, he wasn't a jerk to the media. He was very respectful. But to see those kind of gestures later spoke volumes about him. And to this day, when I see him, we're very friendly. It's not like we're huge friends or anything, but he's always treated me nicely. He's always been good with me. And but just when you see people do those kind of interactions, it speaks volumes about the guys.
And Corey's story is so amazing. I had to do 2 interviews with him on the podcast just because he had so many stories and just like stuff that he went through. And he's such an open book now and I love that Corey, very similar to D'Antonio in that they both made mistakes, and they're both in a space where they could talk about the mistakes, and hopefully them talking about it helps the next person.
Well, Corey had so much equity. This is just a personal feeling. He had so much equity in his reputation. Everything he had done up until his mistakes was perfect. I mean, he came back, he got his degree, he always treated people well, and so I think that this is a very forgiving community. God love, we still worship Pete Rose in Cincinnati, but it's a very forgiving community, and if he never tried to hide. He came back with his head up high. I remember Bill Cook wrote a story about, I think it was Chuck Meshock talking about Corey trying to come back from whatever. Maybe I have that wrong, but I know Chuck was trying to work with Corey. But look, Corey is just a good guy, and even former Xavier players, former UC players, everybody knows that. And look, he's always treated people well. So good for him. He's done some great things. And it's great that he's still. It's great that he's still in the area, and that he's visible and that he's around. And again, he'll always be royalty at UC, I would think.
Oh, for sure. And it's funny. So every time I've been to a UC basketball game and I've had like one of my players or a young person with me, and Corey's been there, I always make it a point to take that young person down and introduce him to Corey. And it's crazy that almost every kid has no idea who Corey Blunt is. Absolutely none.
It is getting to be that time where I teach a class at UC. there's students who they have no idea who Bob Huggins is.
This is crazy.
And when you think about that, like an entire era has passed and new generations of people are coming in, so that it's cool that the Final Four team is still around. A lot of those players are around, but you're getting to the point where people don't remember who they are, and yeah, that's humbling. It makes you feel old for sure.
I know, and I always tell the kids, Google search Corey Blunt and look at all the, and they're like, oh, he played with Michael Jordan,
played with Michael and Magic, yeah.
And it's just, what's so fascinating about it is they meet Corey, and then they Google, and then we're on the way home, driving or something like that, and they're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It's just. But look, let me ask you, writing the book, this is a two-part question. Who was the toughest person to get a hold of for the interview? I know you mentioned Sandy Koufax, but who was the toughest person to get a hold of?
Well, the toughest ones were the guys I didn't get. I never got Nick. I never got D'Antonio. I never got Art. I don't remember. Mick was hard. And I think Mick was hard because he had left and there was, dynamics between him and Hugs. But I knew Mick for so long. Let's see, who was hard? Who was hard to find? So the story in the Crosstown Shootout, legendary story about the crutch, Raleigh Wynn and Joe Pangrazio. Do you know that story? I
think I heard. I think somebody. Yeah, I heard somebody tell it.
Yeah, Raleigh Wynn played at UC and Joe Pangrazio played at Xavier, and it was a Crosstown Shootout. It's going to go 1967, something like that. And as the story goes, they were pushing and bumping, and Pangrazio ended up getting thrown out of bounds. And then he picked up a crutch from somebody in the stands and threw it at Raleigh Wynn. It's like one of my favorite Crosstown Shootout stories. So I tracked down Raleigh Wynn in Tennessee, and so that's a good little get for me, to find him and have him tell that. And then the beauty of it was in 2008, I wrote the same book about Xavier, like Xavier Tales from their locker room. And I went and found Joe Pangrazio from Xavier. So then I had both sides of the story from 1967. And anyway, that was kind of fun.
That is cool.
He was a tough one because he wasn't such a big name. And so I don't even remember how I found him. But a lot of times it's just a reporting challenge. You're making call after call after call and trying to track people down. And I mean, now if I were doing that book now, I would just call you. but you got the best Rolodex in town. But back then it was hard, and I don't know how I found Raleigh Wynn, but that was a great get at that time for sure. Big O.
How was it? So and Big O is so interesting because Oscar doesn't do a lot of interviews. He doesn't talk a lot. When he does talk, he's certain interviews he'll answer questions of certain. You know what I'm talking.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
How was that?
Yeah. So listen. Again, I think I spent a long time trying to get this, but Oscar came down to the Enquirer. And I think I was the deputy sports editor at the time. And then we went into the sports editor's office, closed the door, and he sat there and talked for an hour.
Really? Did you record it?
Alex, it was, I've got to record it, yeah. It was.
That's cool.
One of the great treats. And it was so, Oscar, when he tells stories, they're not superficial BS. He's talking about being asked to leave the hotel in Houston or, getting letters from the KKK before a game or getting asked to leave a restaurant. And, it's deep and it's real. And, then I would go talk to people who were with him. Chuck Maychok was was a roommate of his, and then, but yeah, so fortunate that Oscar would spend that time. And it's funny because he actually came out with his own book either that same year or the next year with some of the same stories. But look, when Oscar wants to talk, he's so thoughtful, and it was. But I remember sitting in that office and Oscar going off, and I mean, you know, Bob Huggins can be like that when he wants to do an interview and he wants to be really thoughtful. He can be tremendous, or he can not be.
Well, I do. I'm glad you said that. I do have a story about that, and I want to get back to Big O. But so I told Hugs, I said, hey, I'm going to do this podcast. I said, but I don't want to interview you until, you know, I've built some steam and we've interviewed a lot of guys that you coach. So I told him, I said, I don't want you to take offense that I haven't interviewed you yet, but I want to build up steam. And he was like, whenever you're ready, let me know. So we finally hit that point where just enough guys had kept bringing him up, telling the stories like it's Hugs time. So I set up the interview with Hugs, and the funniest thing, and he like I laid up like we built this podcast up, coach, and blah blah blah. We're doing an interview, and he literally drives through Wendy's and orders a sandwich during the interview. Michael. He goes during the interview. He goes, hold on a second. Let me get a number 4. Hey June, what do you want? I'm like, but then it gets better. So he gets the sandwich ordered. For some reason, he drops June off, heads back to campus at West Virginia, and he's walking to his office. I don't know all this. I can't hear, you know. And he sounds great, and all of a sudden he goes, Deuce. So his point guard, Deuce McBride, is walking by. He goes, Deuce, talking to Alex Meacham here.
I remember listening to that.
And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
He just had, I was just so, and I was like, well, we got to cut out the Wendy's. You know, it's just like certain things we have, but he's just so classic. But back to Big O, like, that to have that recording.
Yep.
Like, that's worth doing the whole freaking book, Michael.
Well, and that's when I said to someone at UC, like, somebody should get Oscar sitting in a room, kind of like a 30 for 30 thing.
Yep.
But somebody just for the history. I mean, Jack Twyman also, and now he's gone. And
I know.
Somewhere there should be video of Jack Twyman talking.
Yep.
And so, look, the historical value of Oscar Robertson is not measurable for the University of Cincinnati. They should have everything they can recording his history. But no, that was special. That was that's when you're working on a project and you think, okay, I have something here. You know, it's going to be good.
Because you can't have this book without him. Like he has to have, right?
Oh, for sure. Well, yeah. I mean, there's a handful of people you had to have, and of course, he's at the top of that list. Yeah, if he would have refused to talk for it, I probably would have talked to other people about it, but wouldn't have had the same value. And but he was, he was great.
That's awesome.
And with Bob, when I was on the beat covering Coach Huggins, we used to laugh because if he was in the wrong mood, you'd say, "Hey, the sky's blue today, Coach," and he'd say, "You people are idiots. The sky's, green." And, so he would tell one reporter, "Well, we recruited Logan because he could shoot," and then he'd tell another, "We didn't think he could shoot. We thought he could handle the ball." And if he just wanted to be like that, he could be. And I remember kind of taking the same approach as you. Like, I wanted to have stories about him that I could get his responses to. And, he didn't always play along. Sometimes he played along. Sometimes he didn't. But that's how it is. But the Final Four guys were finally ready to talk about him and tell stories. And, Terry and Eric and Corey and Teresa, I mean, those guys are just great storytellers. They were holding nothing back, and it was funny.
Yeah. Now, one of the things you talk about in the book is unforgettable games. And through your research of unforgettable games, Bearcat games, which game to you, through your research, is the one that sticks out? Like maybe just like it's such a great story. Maybe not the biggest game of all time or whatever, but what game really hits you when you're doing your research?
Well, I mean, I think for it's hard to top Huggins' first game and Steve Sanders' shot, and it's hard to top the Duke victory in Alaska. I mean, my gosh, those are just, you can watch those videos over and over and still get goosebumps. And then, historically, the loss to Loyola in what would have been the third straight championship is probably the most devastating bad moment. So I would say, I mean, it's hard to pick one. I mean, if you were in the arena when Steve Sanders hit that shot, you can't forget that.
Yep.
And then, that dunk against Duke. Anybody who I was covering Xavier at the time. I was in a hotel room, I think, in Puerto Rico. But if you were watching that, you can't forget that. And I remember when UC had that hype video before the game, and it ended with that dunk, the place would go crazy.
No question.
So yeah, those are just really amazing moments.
And one of the things that I found fascinating in the book is the conspiracy theory game of 1952 with Western Kentucky. Can you? I'd never heard that story before, and I'm like, what the hell? A power outage changing the nets? Can you talk about it? Twyman was on the team, right?
Oh, Alex, I got to be honest. I did not remember that one. I studied up all morning, and you find one that I forgot. I do not remember that story.
It was the game where it was the game in 1952. Bearcats are playing Western Kentucky. They lose. The Bearcats lose, and there was a power outage at halftime. And during the power outage, apparently Western Kentucky changed the nets. So the Bearcats are a running team, and they changed the nets to where it was so tight that they couldn't get the ball out of the basket to push it. Yeah.
That sounds familiar. Well, I mean, again, the great fun of doing this book was getting the memories that people had.
Yeah.
And, I mean, to have someone like Jack Twyman telling you that story, and this is how he remembered it, was just, and I remember saying to some of these guys, well, what do you guys talk about when you all get together and you joke about the good old days? And that is one of those stories. But, I mean, here's Jack Twyman, who's like the gentleman's gentleman, one of the nicest human beings alive. Mm-hmm. And he's talking about how Western Kentucky orchestrated that whole thing. That makes it even better because it's coming from Jack.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so that's funny. I just found it in the book. It's like 4 paragraphs. Did you pick that out?
But that was, I remember that because that was one of my favorite stories.
Yeah, that is a funny one. And I think it's funnier because it came from Jack.
Yeah, for sure. And the other, and you mentioned this before, but I think the other great value of this too is, you look at those championship teams, and a lot of those guys are no longer with us. And you had a chance to talk to a lot of those guys and document some things, man. That's really special.
It is, and again, you don't think about it when you're in the middle of the project. I had never done a book before, and I just wanted to do a good job. But when it's done, and you're listing in the acknowledgments all the people that you talk to, and you think, yeah, I mean, how fortunate am I to have? I have a drawer full of little micro cassette tapes somewhere with all of these interviews. But I remember Tony Yates, who, had at times been a little surly about his place in history. I remember him talking my ear off for an hour. And, now it's the first thing I thought of when he passed away was how fortunate was I to be able to talk to Tony and have him talk about his time as a player and as a coach and document that. So again, Alex, what you're doing is really it's a special thing to have these guys tell their stories and to document a history. And when we're talking about these guys in another 20 years, you're going to have some amazing recordings of these interviews.
Yeah, I know. That's that's one of the other things that I really wanted to do the podcast. There's so many guys that have never really told their full story. You reached out to me after you heard the Donald Little story, and Donald's one of your favorite guys.
I love Donald. Yeah,
Donald is a guy. I was trying to explain Donald to the guy who produces the podcast. He's a younger guy, so he has the funny thing is he has no idea who a lot of these guys are.
Yeah,
and
of course.
And so I'm telling him the backstory, and I'm telling him Donald. I'm like, Donald goes down as one of the biggest characters, like in Bearcat basketball. He was such a lovable giant. If you were around him, you loved him. You just absolutely loved him. And when I reached out to him about being on the podcast, I said, and I try not, just like with you, you can attest to this, I don't tell him what we're talking about. I try not to keep it too scripted. I like it to be organic. And, I do my research and I have some notes, but we just kind of free flow. And I just told Donald, I said, can we talk about anything? And he goes, yeah, we can talk about the kidnap thing if that's what you mean. And I'm like, he goes, and he tells me, he says, I've never talked about it, like ever. He says, I've never really talked about it. So that was the first time. So,
yeah. So, again, when I think of him, I think of him after games, whether he was horrible, he wasn't, he was at times inconsistent, but whether he had a great game or a bad game, he went out and met with every kid who was in line, looking at that, in those days, there were lines of people outside the locker room.
Mm-hmm.
And he always met with kids, and he was always nice to me. And even after the kidnapping incident that I had to write about and report about, I mean, he walked right up to me the first time he saw me and was like, have you been looking for? You've been looking for me, haven't you? And I said, I have. And he said, well, let's talk. And I mean, that was the worst of times for him, but he still came up and talked to me. But Donald was, I mean, when he and Hugs would fight, get mad at each other, whew, those were some scenes. But Donald was I thought he had a good heart. He
absolutely.
He made some mistakes as well, but I thought he had a good heart, and he was really good to kids.
Yep. Yeah.
I did. I enjoyed that interview you did with him.
Well, thank you. Yeah, Donald's great. First of all, I want to thank you for putting me in the book actually twice. One with Ruben's mother when she passed away, and that game he played, that was just unbelievable. I mean, and Ruben came on the podcast and talked about it. You weren't covering the Bearcats at that time,
no,
correct?
I did not. No.
You came after
Kenyon. In fact, Ruben was one of those guys that I never heard of either, and so you sharing that story was great because otherwise I would not have had it. Didn't get a chance to talk to him for the book either.
Yeah, he Rube is believe it or not, one of my favorite teammates that I've ever had in like on my whole basketball career. Still, he and I talk a bunch. Just such a great dude. When I interviewed him on the podcast, he talked about, he remembered like word for word the conversation he and I had in the hotel. Like on the podcast, he's talking about. I'm like, Rube, that's exactly what I tell people you said. He's like, oh man, I remembered. I remember talking about I was going to buy my mom a house, blah, blah, blah. He said, I remember when Rod Baker knocked on the door. Like, he remembered everything. I was like, man. So, yeah, I appreciate you putting that in there. One of the games, I'm not sure if you remember, one of the things that really, if you go look at the time in Fifth Third Arena, the Shoemaker, there are so many great basketball moments. But I think, and you tell me if you agree or there's one that should exist in this space as well, but I think one of the moments that emotionally just sits above all the rest is when It was senior night. Andy Kennedy was the coach. Eric Hicks walks across the court, and Hugs comes out of that side and hugs. Were you there for that game?
I was not there. I was not at that game, but I do remember that.
Did you talk to Eric about that in the book, right?
I don't remember. I think so.
I thought you did in the book. Yeah.
I know I've talked to Eric about it. I've had some great book signings with him. I think that is in the book. That was a really well orchestrated moment, for sure. And I think it's always good when Hugs comes back. I hope one day Mick can come back and have some moments like that here. Because it's just good. It's good for everybody. It's good for the university. Yeah. It's good for the fans. That is a good. You're right. There have been some really special moments at that arena, and over the years there's been some great ones. Really.
I remember that, man. I there was not a dry eye in the house.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Oh man, that was so covering the Bearcats during the time you did. What's one story or one moment that just sticks out to you above the rest?
Well, I mean, it's not always fun when you're the beat reporter. So some of the moments that stick out to me are some of the times that it wasn't fun.
Mm-hmm. You could laugh now.
No, not really. It's silly because you're basically covering a basketball team. But there were times we were banned from practice, which I understood. There were times we were banned from the arena. I'll tell you one that I remember that I thought was funny was Thanksgiving Day. So my philosophy as a beat writer was to be there every day, no matter what. If the team was there, I was going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a way to show coaches and players, I'll work as hard as you work. And so there was Thanksgiving. I think it was Thanksgiving morning, and Coach Huggins is mad and he's yelling at the team, and then he turns to the managers and he's like, "You call June and tell her to stop cooking that turkey. I'm not having these blah, blah, blahs over to my house tonight." And he threw them all off the court, and he's livid. And it was my first year on the beat, and I remember my jaw was like, what just happened? And I remember one of the managers walking up and goes, "Don't worry, this happens every other year."
Yep.
And so but then, if I remember this correctly, I think Hugs thought they were still going to come over that night because, he off the court, everything was always fine. But the guys were so mad at him, they didn't go over that night. I think they ended up going over the next day. But
wow.
I just remember I think I was sitting like courtside for that. And I just remember thinking, what is going on? But it was a great, typical, classic Hugs moment. He was so good at those.
Oh, he was.
So anyway, that was just a funny. When you're at practice every day, you see and hear some of the craziest things, and it's why I like to go. It gave you insight as to what was going on. But I always love that story because it was just such a classic. Tell you put the turkey away. We're not having these guys over. It's so funny. It's just so funny.
How did Hugs treat you during your time?
It's a roller coaster ride.
You sound like the players too.
Well, I mean, it's true because with him, you're either with him or against him. And, but that's not the job of a beat reporter. That inevitably a beat reporter is going to write things that and write things you don't like, and you hope that they're fair and they're accurate, which is what I always tried to be. But inevitably, no, we fought. I think we had a very playful, fun give and take for a long time. And then we would fight about something and he'd get mad about something. And by that time I'd covered 3 programs and I was more of a veteran guy. So it was probably good to have a veteran person with him.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought he was a hell of a coach. I didn't agree with all the ways he was with the media, and I also thought sometimes he did a disservice with the players by painting the media as the enemy, because I don't think that helps you. Especially, again, you and I were talking about if you stay in the market. But look, he was mostly pretty good with me, and even if we sparred a little, there was only like a 3 or 4 month period where it was really, really bad.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, and I knew everybody in the program, so if he didn't want to talk to me, it was fine. Sometimes he wasn't very quotable anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to know all the players, and I knew all the assistants. And if he would shut me out, that would make me want to work harder to break a story. But it's inevitable when you're on a beat, Alex, that a coach is not going to like everything that you do.
Right.
That's just the way it is. And every coach I ever covered, Gene Katie, Skip Prosser, we all had our moments.
Mm-hmm.
But look, I think I remember saying this to him one day. I'm trying to be the best I can be at my job, just like you are, and so I would think you'd respect that. And
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, look, I appreciate his stature and history at UC and in college basketball. He's done an amazing job everywhere he's been.
Oh, for sure.
Maybe one day when it's all over, we'll have a beer somewhere and we'll laugh at some things. But it was a roller coaster ride.
And he'll do that. He'll do that, Michael. When
he's always been nicer to me when I wasn't the beat writer. Like when I was covering Xavier, he called me a traitor, but it was always fun. And then afterward, I've seen him a handful of times since I was off the beat. And it's okay. But when you're the beat writer, there's some natural tension that goes on, and
yeah,
it's a different kind of job, and you're there every single day. So, but look, I wouldn't trade it for the world. It was a great experience, and watching him coach was a great experience too.
Yeah, no question. You were there for the Kenyon Martin leg, the broken.
I was covering Xavier at the time. In fact,
really?
I was on the road with Xavier. I know, it doesn't seem like I was always around there. I was covering Xavier in the NCAA tournament. In fact, I remember the Xavier players finding out about Kenyon, and the Xavier players and coaches were devastated as well. I mean, everybody was just down about it. Yeah. During Skip's time, I think there was a lot of respect between the programs.
No
but
question.
I don't think anybody wanted, anybody thought that was a good thing. And so, I remember the Xavier players being really upset about that. Tough. And I didn't know Kenyon. I've probably talked to him less than a handful of times in my life. But I know what everybody thought of him. I know what you thought of him. And obviously for UC basketball, that was a horrific moment.
Yeah, it was. It was. And a lot of people just, you always hear like Cincinnati has the sports curse, which a lot of people tie back to the Bengals hurting Bo Jackson. Have you ever heard this?
I have, but when you're from Cleveland, you have a hard time thinking anybody else is.
True. Who am I talking to? That's right.
And I don't even want to hear it from the people in Boston or Chicago. They've got nothing in that game.
Oh, that's funny. Hey, you know what I really enjoyed? We had a great time when we did the book signing. It was me, you, Steve Sanders, John Meeker, and Joseph Beth.
Yeah. Yep.
And there was just some great stories.
All the book signings were so. You were talking about Ruben. I did one with Ruben and Corey down at Fountain Square bookstore, and hardly anybody showed up to buy the book, but it was the best time. Those guys were so funny talking about NBA stories.
Oh man,
just
cool.
Sitting back and listening, but. I'll tell you, getting to know some of the guys off the court and at these signings, it's been a pleasure. Maybe that was the benefit from the book I didn't know I would have is because no one was going to show up to a book signing for me. But I learned that pretty quickly. But
so that was smart. That was smart on your part to have the players come in.
Well, again, I didn't know what I was doing at first, but I learned pretty quickly. I'll tell you what the difference was. I did a book signing by myself. I showed up, and there was one guy there. He had already bought the book, and he looked really disappointed that it was me and him. And then I asked Melvin, who I didn't cover Melvin. I don't even know why we have a relationship, but we do. And I reached out to Mel, and this was my second book signing, and I showed up in the parking lot to the small bookstore in Montgomery, and Alex, there was a freaking line out the door into the parking lot for Mel. I mean, they certainly weren't there for me or the book. And I was like, hey, I always knew people liked him as a player. Of course, I think 80% of the audience in that line is female, but we got in that, and I'm telling you, Melvin didn't stop signing books for an hour or two. It was insane, and I thought, wow, that's what really told me that I had to have players. And,
yeah, for sure.
I mean, I went to the UC bookstore at Christmas with Eric Hicks, and we set some kind of crazy record that he was pretty proud of. But, I mean, people were just lining up, and he was delightful telling stories. So it was really, again, I met Eric when he was a recruit. You know, he's probably 18 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And now, 10 years later, we're doing a signing together. It was just really fun. But, yeah, you're right. They were all really fun. That one with you guys at Joseph Beth was a lot of fun. I don't think we sold a ton of books, but it was a lot of fun.
It was.
Yeah.
It's as I sit there and listen to you, it really does feel like you were around UC basketball forever. Like, seriously.
I know.
Like, I swear
I'm thinking
you
about
covered.
that myself right now.
I feel like I was like, I swear you covered my time, but obviously you didn't. But okay, give me your top 3 Bearcats that you've ever covered, just like guys you've enjoyed, talking to, dealing with. Your top 3.
Well, Logan would top that list because we just, people told me he was going to be difficult to deal with, and for me it turned out to be the opposite. I don't know why. I worked really hard at that, but
the Cleveland relationship.
Maybe it was. He also let's be honest. He also had 2 fantastic years, and his senior year was as good as they come.
Yep.
Leonard Stokes was always a professional. Yes sir, no sir. I think he probably called me Mr. Perry when I was covering the team. But if I see Leonard today, he's again super professional, respectful, and then really, even though I only covered the NCAA tournament, I feel like I know those Final Four guys, and they all treat me really well, and they're all super nice to me. Again, in a professional, respectful way. Nobody's best friends with anybody, but Terry, Corey, Anthony Beard was one of the first guys to just really treat me well, and I really enjoyed him. I thought he was super mature as a player, and also kind of exemplified a little of what Hugs was trying to bring to the program. Therese was always super nice. I don't know. I've had a pretty good run with some of the players, but
yeah,
Steve Logan, his senior year was special.
Yep.
Big shots, big games, big moments.
From a little guy.
From a little guy who walked around with a little chip. I remember him outscoring Southern Miss all by himself.
Yep.
I want to say it was like 42-39 or something.
I was there. I was on that team.
Himself, he just, I don't know. I like Lowe, and I also feel like Steve Logan grew up quite a bit. And,
yeah, for sure.
I enjoyed him, and he's a great player that senior year.
But I always tell people, Logan wouldn't have been great if he didn't have that attitude that he had. He would not be half. I always tell when I show like some of my players pictures of Logan, they're like, he doesn't look like he's in shape. And I'm like, he probably wasn't. The majority of his, maybe there was one year where he was in elite, at least really good shape. But I was like, he was so skilled. His basketball IQ was through the roof, but more so, he just was a nasty dude on the court.
Eye of the tiger, baby. He came with that eye of the tiger every game, and and then when it comes down to a last shot, and this one guy's going to take it, and he still does it. And then I'll tell you, I never covered Chunk Kilpatrick. Never covered him. Never met him. Never was around him. He had no idea who I was. And when I called him for this book, his season had just ended. And that guy sat and talked to me for like an hour, like we were longtime friends.
That's awesome.
And I just, again, I barely know Sean, but when it came time to talk to me for that book, he treated me about as well as you could ask anybody to. And I've been lucky. Guys that I covered at Purdue in the 80s, I'm on Facebook with, and I see them all adults with grown kids, and it's all good. All the Xavier guys that I covered, it was great. I had a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah. Well, hey, let me ask you, we get towards the end of the podcast. I always like to ask quick questions, quick answers. So you ready for this?
Nobody does quick answers with you.
I know.
I'll try.
I know. You know one of these questions that I'm coming with. So I'm just going to start with it.
I'm dying. Come on.
I need you to name 3 rappers, and Vanilla Ice cannot be one of them. Go, Michael.
Wait, can I use
come on. You're killing me.
Use Lin-Manuel Miranda from Hamilton?
Who?
Hamilton.
Oh, the play. No, that's not a rapper. He's not a rapper.
He wrote an entire show.
That's not a rapper. That's a theatric, a thespian. He's a thespian. That's a thespian. I need a rapper.
A real
from the
rapper.
Hood, Michael, from the straight up hood.
Is Snoop Dogg?
Snoop Dogg. We got one.
Right.
Okay, you got 2 more.
Nicki Minaj is a rapper, right?
Yeah, I did not expect that one. Nicki Minaj. I was not ready for that. I was so not ready for that.
Wait. What about your guy Pitbull? Is he a rapper?
He is not a my guy. Come on, Michael. That's not my guy. First of all,
I know
secondly,
that pisses you off.
He's not a rapper. I don't know what. No, I don't know what. Who knows what he does? Like, I don't know what space his music rests in. But there's a rap group right from one of the biggest rap groups in the area.
Is Run DMC a rapper?
Absolutely, it's a rap group. That's a rap group.
Okay, can I use them?
You can use them.
All right.
You can. Wow, this was a struggle bus. I was hoping you were going to. Wow. So when I interviewed Keith Jenkins and I asked him who's the greatest rapper of all time, and he said Jay-Z, did you agree with that? Are you even familiar with Jay-Z's material?
A little, but I couldn't get in that conversation. Like, I struggled to come up with 3, and you want me to tell you the greatest of all time?
No, I don't even. I don't want you to answer that question because I don't know.
Hey, I'm pretty proud that I just did what I did.
Yeah, I'm proud of you. I'm shocked at the Nicki Minaj, but I'm happy about that. You had a great mix of old and new, so that's great. All right, question number 2. Question number 2. If you could be any Bearcat player in history, not Oscar Robertson, Oscar's out of the question. If you could be one Bearcat basketball player in history, who would you want to be?
Wow, I haven't heard you ask that one to anybody.
This is
well,
special.
It would be someone from the championship team because I want to win a championship.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah,
who would it be from that group? I think there's one guy. I could see you saying, "Come on."
Well, Yates was the floor leader of that team.
Yeah, true.
Ron Bonham was a big guy. Wiesenhahn was I'll go with Yates.
Okay.
That seems like a weird answer. I just know I want to win the championship.
Yeah, that's fair. I like that. All right. That was weird. That was a bad answer. All right. That's all right. Okay, number 3, and the final question. If you could do a 30 for 30 on one Bearcat team in one season, what team would you do a 30 for 30 on? Oh,
I think the Final Four team.
Yeah, no question.
Come on.
No question.
First off, all those guys are great personalities.
Yep, agreed.
And great, unbelievable storytellers. And the fact that they lost to Weber in the Fab Five, I think you would have to.
No question.
You would have to do that team.
Yep.
I mean, what a cast of characters.
I agree, 100%. I'm glad we're on the same page. Tell everyone quickly how they can still get the book.
I don't even know, man. I got a case in my closet.
So you got to get over Michael
they're
Barry.
Like sold out. I you know what, Alex? I gave Terry a case of the old edition. I only have like 5 or 6 of 2014 one. I gave Terry a case yesterday, and I told him if he can sign them and it could be a fundraiser for his family. So I would say right now, if you want to buy that book, reach out to Terry Nelson on Facebook and get it from him, so that you can donate, help
really
out
cool.
his family.
Really cool.
That's what I would say right now. That would be a good use. That was a good use of a case of books.
Excellent.
But I think I've only got 5 or 6 left of the 2014s. They've all, Bearcat fans have been great. They've sold really well, and I really didn't come on here to pitch anything. It was just fun to talk to you.
No, I reached out to you. And I asked you to.
After Larkin.
Sorry. From now on, I'll always
ask him about rappers?
No, I don't think I did.
All right.
I don't think I did. He's an R&B type of guy. I think like the smooth. He likes Luther Vandross or something. So I'd have to ask him.
I thought you were going to say like Air Supply.
Oh, Michael, that's a whole other discussion. Hey, I do appreciate your time. Also appreciate your friendship. You've always been great to me. If you remember, we would get breakfast downtown at First Watch.
Yeah, I don't even know how this started either, Alex. I don't even know how we started knowing each other, but it's always been fun and always enjoyed getting together and seeing you and talking. But I don't remember how all that started either. When I called you for the book, I had never covered you either.
You didn't, and the thing is, I think one thing that bonded us was the book, and your book, my book. We started talking book talk, had lunch. Hey, Michael, what did you go through with your book? Blah blah blah. That kind of
yeah. I remember about your book for my kids when my sons were younger.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How are they doing, by the way? How's your family?
Good. The older one's a junior at South Carolina. He's down there with Andy Astley from UC.
Yeah.
And Frank Martin. And goes to all those games. And then the other 2 are high school seniors, and they're picking out their colleges right now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Goes fast, man.
It does.
Goes fast. Well, listen, I thank you again for your friendship. Thank you again for your time. And thank you for this book, this piece of history. And a lot of people that are Bearcat fans that don't have it need to make sure they get their hands on it, because it's a lot of great stories in here. So I appreciate you. It's probably one of the few that you document so much history of a lot of these people that have passed away and all that stuff. A lot of great stuff in there. So
yeah, definitely long time fans really liked it, because you worked in the 40s and 50s, and they were happy to read about that. So it's all great. Well, thank you, Alex. I appreciate your asking me to be on.
No problem. Hey, Michael, we'll catch up, and good luck to your Browns. I don't know how they're doing with 0 wide receivers.
They're getting whooped by the Jets right now, so it's not very good.
I'm sorry to hear that. Well, hey, Michael, we'll definitely be in touch, and thanks again.
All right, take care.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
I want to thank everyone for listening to Season 2 of the Bearcat Basketball Podcast. Once again, you can follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Alex_Meacham. Meacham spelled Meacham. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn, Alex Meacham. I'm on Snapchat, Big Meach 41. And I'm now dancing on TikTok at Alex Meacham 41. I appreciate everyone listening to the Bearcat Basketball Podcast. Go Bearcats!